China doesn't fear Western sanctions anymore, and that should worry the West. When the United States and its allies punished Russia with sweeping sanctions after the Ukraine war, they thought it would send a clear warning to others, especially China. The message was simple: defy us and we'll cut you off from the global economy. But China isn't backing down. Despite years of Western threats, from chip bans and tariffs to financial blacklists, Beijing keeps growing, innovating, and expanding its global influence. Why? Because China has spent decades quietly preparing for this moment, building an independent economic and technological system that can withstand pressure, reduce dependency on the West, and even turn challenges into opportunities. This is no longer the China that once relied on foreign factories and Western technology. Today's China is a self-sustaining powerhouse with its own industries, supply chains, and financial networks. Here are 5 reasons why China no longer fears Western sanctions. Number 1. China is the world's factory, and the world still needs it. Let's start with the obvious. China remains the world's factory floor. It produces more than 30% of all global goods, from smartphones and cars to solar panels and semiconductors. No other nation comes close. The US contributes only around 8%, and even all of Europe combined can't replace what China provides. If Western nations ever tried to impose sweeping sanctions on China, they would be sanctioning themselves. Remember the chaos during the COVID-19 pandemic? When Chinese factories shut down for a few weeks, the entire world economy suffered. Apple couldn't ship iPhones, automakers faced chip shortages, and even medical equipment was in short supply. That was a small preview of what a global sanction on China would look like: total economic disruption. China's dominance in critical supply chains gives it leverage. It produces over 80% of the world's solar panels, 70% of lithium-ion batteries, and 60% of rare earth elements, which are essential for smartphones, EVs, and defense systems. Even the US Department of Defense admitted that its military technology depends on materials refined in China. So while Western leaders talk about decoupling, in reality, it's almost impossible. American companies like Apple, Tesla, and Intel still rely heavily on Chinese factories. In fact, over 90% of iPhones are still assembled in China. In short, China doesn't fear being cut off because it knows the world can't afford to cut it off. Number 2. Technological self-reliance, from copycat to innovator. 2 decades ago, China was known as the land of cheap copies and manufacturing labor, but that image is long outdated. Today, China is an innovation superpower. It leads the world in AI patents, 5G infrastructure, renewable energy technology, and electric vehicles. Companies like Huawei, BYD, CATL, and DJI are not just Chinese champions, they're global leaders. Huawei's 5G technology is still years ahead of American or European competitors. BYD now sells more electric cars than Tesla, and CATL supplies batteries to nearly every major car maker in the world. When the US banned Huawei from using American chips and Google services, most analysts predicted its downfall. Instead, Huawei doubled down on R&D, investing $23 billion in 2023 alone. In 2024, Huawei launched the Mate 60 Pro, powered by a domestically produced 7nm chip, shocking Western analysts who thought China couldn't build advanced semiconductors without US technology. That single phone sent a clear message: China can now stand on its own. Beyond smartphones, China has built entire ecosystems independent of Western systems. The Beidou navigation system, a Chinese alternative to GPS. Harmony OS, a domestic operating system replacing Android. WeChat Pay and Alipay, which replaced Visa and MasterCard in daily transactions. And it's not just hardware. China now graduates more STEM students annually than the US, Japan, Germany, and the UK combined. Its universities and startups are at the forefront of robotics, biotech, and quantum computing. In short, the era when the West could cripple China by blocking tech exports is gone. Beijing has built a parallel system, one that's not just surviving, but thriving. Number 3. De-dollarization. China's plan to escape US financial control. For decades, America's biggest weapon wasn't its army, it was the US dollar. Nearly 85% of international transactions are conducted in dollars. That means Washington can freeze assets, block trade, and isolate entire nations, as it did with Iran, Venezuela, and Russia. But China saw this coming, and it spent years preparing an escape plan. First, it built the cross-border interbank payment system, its own version of SWIFT. Over 1,400 banks across 100 countries now use it to process yuan transactions. Second, China developed the digital yuan, or the ECNY, becoming the first major economy to issue a central bank digital currency. This allows trade to happen directly between countries, with no US banks involved. Third, Beijing began promoting trade in local currencies. In 2024, over 90% of trade between China and Russia was settled in yuan or rubles, not dollars. Saudi Arabia and Brazil also started accepting yuan for oil and commodity deals. Even France, a close US ally, completed a liquefied natural gas (LNG) transaction in yuan through China's CIPS network. And it's working. The IMF reported that the yuan share in global foreign exchange reserves has nearly tripled in the past 5 years. China also leads the BRICS initiative to create alternative financial systems, such as the New Development Bank, reducing dependence on the World Bank and IMF. So if the US tried to cut off China financially, Beijing could still trade with much of the developing world, especially Asia, Africa, and Latin America, regions that now account for the majority of global growth. Number 4. Sanctions have made China stronger, not weaker. Here's the irony. Every time the West tries to hurt China, China grows more resilient. When Trump launched his trade war in 2018, imposing tariffs on $370 billion worth of Chinese goods, the U.S. trade deficit didn't shrink. Instead, it hit a record high by 2022. China responded not with panic, but with strategy. It expanded trade with the global south, signing deals with countries across Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. By 2024, ASEAN became China's largest trading partner, surpassing both the US and the EU. Trade with Africa exceeded $280 billion, and China remains the continent's top investor. At home, Beijing used sanctions as motivation to push Made in China 2025, a national strategy to dominate in robotics, clean energy, aerospace, and semiconductors. The results? China now produces over 60% of the world's electric vehicles. It's the largest exporter of green technologies. It controls 80% of the solar energy supply chain. Even the chip ban backfired. Domestic companies like SMIC, YMTC, and Lungsan are rapidly improving, with state-backed funding and a massive domestic market to test and scale innovations. Instead of crippling China, Western pressure only accelerated its march towards self-sufficiency. As a senior Chinese official once said, "Sanctions are like wind. They make the flame of innovation burn brighter." And finally, number 5. The world is no longer controlled by the West. The final and most important reason China doesn't fear sanctions is this: the world order itself has changed. In the past, the US and Europe dominated global trade, finance, and media. But today, their influence is declining, while Asia is rising. China leads the BRICS Plus alliance, which now includes countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, and Egypt. Together, BRICS Plus nations represent 45% of the global population and nearly 36% of the world's GDP, PPP, a larger share than the G7. They're also trading more in local currencies, building their own financial institutions, and rejecting Western-imposed rules. Even close U.S. allies are reconsidering their dependence on Washington. Germany continues deep trade with China despite U.S. pressure. France has called for strategic autonomy. ASEAN nations maintain neutrality, balancing relations with both powers. The truth is, global power is shifting east. In the 1990s, the West could isolate any country with sanctions. Today, China can turn to Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where many nations view it not as a threat, but as a partner for development. This growing multipolar world means sanctions no longer carry the same weight. When one door closes in the West, China now has 100 others opening across the global South. So, what does this mean for the future? It means the old world order, where Western sanctions could bring nations to their knees, is fading away. China has proven that economic independence is possible, even in a world still dominated by the dollar. It has diversified its trade, created its own tech ecosystem, and built powerful alliances across Asia and beyond. Even American think tanks are admitting it. The Brookings Institution recently reported that China's resilience to external shocks exceeds expectations. The Atlantic Council wrote that sanctions are unlikely to achieve desired outcomes against a system as integrated and self-sufficient as China's. This is the new reality. China isn't afraid because it's prepared. When the West threatens to cut it off, Beijing simply adjusts, innovates, and moves on. It no longer plays defense, it plays offense. Once upon a time, Western sanctions could destroy a country's economy overnight, but those days are over. China has built its own technological backbone, diversified trade routes, and fostered global partnerships that make isolation impossible. The more the West threatens, the faster China accelerates towards self-sufficiency. The more barriers imposed, the stronger its domestic industries become. In the end, China doesn't fear Western sanctions anymore. It's outgrown them. And as the global balance of power shifts eastward, the tools of Western dominance, sanctions, control over the dollar, and technological monopoly are losing their power. The 21st century is no longer about who can impose the most sanctions. It's about who can build, innovate, and lead. And on that front, China has already taken the lead. The world is changing, and this time, it's changing on China's terms. So what do you think? Do you agree with our video? Tell us what you think by leaving your comments below. And if you like what you watched, make sure to hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to show your support.